Okay, hello. We are on to lesson number 6 in fantasy, and our focus today is on what lessons can we learn from fantasy. So, when we think about the Thief of Always, I hope to never be imprisoned in a home, which is a bit ironic right now, being that we are all stuck in our homes. But in the way that Harvey is stuck, we are not. So that might not happen to me in that regard. I also probably am not going to be turned into a vampire anytime soon. Um, but there are a lot of things that Harvey has experienced and learned that I can learn from. So, as we are listening today, I want you to pay particular attention and think about what can we learn from Harvey's experiences. Um, yeah, I think that's it. We're going to be listening to chapter 11 and 12. And yeah, let's do it.
And wouldn't do it again, then left her to her secret sorrows. Chapter 12. What the flood gave up, and what it took. "Well," said Wendell, when Harvey came to his room, "what's the story?" Harvey shrugged. "Everything's fine," he said. "Why don't we just enjoy ourselves while we can?" "Enjoy ourselves?" Wendell said. "How can we enjoy ourselves when we're locked in?" "It's better in here than it is out in the world," Harvey said. Wendell looked at him in astonishment. "That's true, isn't it?" As he spoke, he grabbed hold of Wendell's hand, and Wendell realized there was a ball of paper in Harvey's palm, which he was trying to pass between the two of them. "Maybe you should just find a quiet little corner and do some reading," he said, glancing down at their hands as he spoke. Wendell got the idea. He claimed the balled-up note from Harvey's hand and said, "Maybe I'll do that." "Good," said Harvey. "I'm going to go out and enjoy the sun while I can." That was exactly what he did. He had a lot of planning to do before midnight, which was when the note told Wendell they should meet to make their escape. Surely even the forces that guarded the house had to sleep sometime. The business of keeping the seasons rolling around couldn't be easy, and of all the hours to slip away, midnight seemed the most promising. But he didn't suppose it would be easy. The house had been a trap for decades, perhaps centuries. Who knew how old its evil really was? And even at midnight, it would not be so foolish as to leave the exit wide open. It would have to be quick and clever and not panic or lose their tempers once they were in the mist. The real world was out there somewhere. All they had to do was find it. He knew when he saw Wendell for Halloween that the note had been read and understood. There was a look in Wendell's eyes that said, "I'm ready. I'm nervous, but I'm ready." The rest of the evening passed for the two of them, like the performance of a strange play, in which they were the actors, and the house, or whoever haunted it, was the audience. They went about enjoying themselves as though this was a night like any other, heading out to play trick-or-treat with a show of loud laughter, even though they were both shuddering in their borrowed shoes, then coming in to eat their supper and spend what they hoped would be their last Christmas in the house. They opened their presents, a mechanical dog for Wendell, a magician's kit for Harvey, said their good nights to Mrs. Griffin. Goodbye, of course, not good night, but Harvey didn't dare let her know, and then went to bed. The house grew quiet, and quieter still. The snow no longer sighed at the sill, nor the wind in the chimney. It was, Harvey thought, the deepest silence he'd ever heard. So deep that he could hear his heartbeat in his ears, and every rustle of his body against the sheets sounded like a roll of drums. A little before midnight he got up and dressed, moving slowly and carefully, so as to make as little noise as possible. Then he headed out into the passageway, and, slipping like a thief from shadow to shadow, hurried down the stairs and out into the night. He left not by the front door, it was heavy and creaked loudly, but by the kitchen door, which brought him out at the side of the house. Though the wind had dropped, the air was still bitter, and the surface of the snow had frozen. It crackled as he walked, however lightly he trod. But he was beginning to hope that the eyes and ears of the house were indeed closed at this hour. If not, why hadn't he been challenged? And he might make it to the perimeter without attracting attention. Just as he was about to turn the corner, however, that sweet hope was soured, as somebody in the murk behind him called his name. He froze in his tracks, hoping the darkness would conceal him, but the voice came again and again called his name. It was not a voice he recognized. Not Wendell, certainly, nor Mrs. Griffin. Not Jive, not Rictus, not Mar. This was a frail voice, the voice of somebody who barely knew how to shape the syllables of his name. R-V. And then, all of a sudden, he knew the voice, and his heart, which had been working overtime since he'd slipped out of bed, grew so loud in his ears it almost drowned out the summons when it came again. "Lulu?" he murmured. "Yes," said the voice. "Where are you?" "Near," she said. He stared at the thicket, hoping for some glimpse of her, but all he could see was the starlight glittering on the frosted leaves. "You're leaving," she said. Her words slurred. "Yes," he whispered, "and you have to come with us." He took a step toward her, and as he did so, some of the glitter that he thought was frost retreated from him. What was she wearing that shimmered this way? "Don't be afraid," he said. "I don't want you to look at me," she said. "What's wrong?" "Please," she said, "just keep your distance." She retreated even farther from him, and seemed to lose her balance as she did so. She dropped to the ground, the thicket around her shaking. Harvey stepped forward to help her up, but she let out such a sob that he stopped in his tracks. "I only want to help," he said. "You can't help me," she replied, every word pained. "It's too late. You just have to go while you still can. I just wanted to give you something to remember me by." He saw her move in the shadows, reaching out in his direction. "Look away," she said. He turned his head away from her. "Now close your eyes and promise you won't open them." He dutifully closed his eyes. "I promise," he said. And now he heard her moving toward him, her breath laborious. "Open your hand," she said. Her voice was near now. He knew if he opened his eyes, he'd be face to face with her. But he had made a promise and was determined to keep it. He put out his hand and felt first one, then two, then three heavy little objects, cold and wet, dropped into his cupped palm. "This was all I could find," Lulu said. "I'm sorry." "Can I look?" he asked. "Not yet. Let me leave first." He closed his fingers around the gifts she'd given him, trying to make sense of them by touch. What were they? Pieces of frozen stone? No, they were carved. He could feel grooves on one, a head on another. And now, of course, he knew what he held. 3 survivors of his ark, dredged up from the depths of the lake. The answer was no comfort to him, quite the reverse. He shuddered as he put the puzzle of Lulu's silvery gleam together with the knowledge of what he held. She had swum down to the bottom of the lake to recover these figures, a descent that was beyond the capacity of any land dweller. No wonder she'd retreated into the shadows, ordering him not to look at her. She wasn't human any longer. She was becoming, or had already become, a sister to the strange fish that circled in these dark waters, cold-blooded and silver-skinned. "Oh, Lulu," he said. How did this happen? Don't waste your time with me, she murmured. Just go while you've a chance. I want to help, he said. You can't, came the reply. Can't help me. I've been here too long. My life is over. That's not true, Harvey said. We're the same age. But I've been here so long, I don't even remember. Her voice trailed away. Don't remember what? Maybe I just don't want to remember, she said. It'll hurt too much. She made a long, choked sigh. You have to go, she said in a whisper. Go while you still can. I'm not afraid. Then you're stupid, she said. Because you should be. He heard the thicket shake as she started to retreat from him. Wait, he said. She made no reply. Lulu! The din of her departure grew louder. By the sound of it, she was almost throwing herself out of his range. Breaking his promise, he opened his eyes and caught a glimpse of her as she fled. A shadow in the shadows, no more. He started after her, not knowing what he would say or do when he caught up with her, but knowing he'd never forgive himself if he didn't somehow help. Maybe if he persuaded her to go with him, out of the shadow of the house, its vicious magic would be undone. Or maybe he could find some doctor for her in the outside world who could cure her of this malformation. Anything rather than leaving her to return to the lake. Its waters were in view now, gleaming darkly between the branches of the thicket. Lulu had reached the bank, and for a moment the meager starlight found her. All that Harvey had feared was true, and more. A fin grew from her bent and scaly back, and her legs had almost fused together. Her arms had become short and stubby, her fingers webbed. But it was her face, glimpsed as she turned back to look at him, that was the greatest shock. Her hair had fallen out, and her nose disappeared. Her mouth had lost its lips, and her blue eyes turned to swiveling silver balls, lidless and lashless. And yet, despite their freakishness, there was human feeling in those eyes, and on that mouth, a terrible sadness that he knew would never leave his heart if he lived to be 1,000. You were my friend, she said, as she teetered on the bank. Thank you for that. Then she tumbled into the water. He went to the edge of the lake at a dash, but by the time he reached the place from which she dived, the ripples were disappearing and the bubbles breaking. He watched the icy waters for a minute or more, hoping she would see him and surface. But she'd gone where he couldn't follow. And that, it seemed, was the end of it. Clutching her gifts to him like talismans, he trudged away from the lake and down the lawn to keep his rendezvous with Wendell. Chapter 13. The Fourth Part of Darkness. What happened to you? Wendell whispered, when Harvey reached the bottom of the lawn. I thought we were meeting at midnight. I got waylaid, Harvey said. He'd intended to tell Wendell what had just transpired, but his friend was obviously nervous enough without being told about Lulu's fate. Harvey slipped the 3 survivors of the Ark into his pocket, and resolved only to speak of the encounter when he and Wendell were safely away from this terrible place. Just one thing stood between them and that ambition: the wall of mist. Now, as ever, it seemed innocent enough, but that was an illusion, of course, like so many things in Mr. Hood's kingdom. We have to be very organized about this, Harvey said to Wendell. Once we're in the wall, we lose our sense of direction, so we have to be sure we keep walking in a straight line and not let the mist turn us around. How do we do that? Said Wendell. I think one of us should go in first, and the other one keep hold of his hand. Me, said Wendell eagerly. I want to be first. No problem. Then I'll keep my back to the house and keep guiding you. Who knows, maybe the wall's so thin you'll just be able to pull me through. We can hope, Wendell said. Are you ready? Harvey asked, extending his hand. Wendell took it. Whenever you are, he said. Then let's get out of here. Wendell nodded and stepped into the mist. Instantly, Harvey felt his grip tighten. Don't let go, Wendell said, his voice already remote, although he was just a pace away. Just keep walking, Harvey said, as they reached arm's length. Any sign of... Before he could finish his question, a noise from the house behind him sealed his lips. He glanced back. The front door was open, and a light was burning in the hall, throwing into silhouette the figure rushing down the porch steps. It was Mrs. Griffin. The noise he'd heard was not from her lips, however. Nothing human could make such a din. He saw Mrs. Griffin glance up toward the roof as she hurried down the lawn, and following her gaze, saw the noisemaker rising against the stars. He knew its name, even though he couldn't see its face. Hood had 4 servants, and he'd met only 3, Rictus, Jive, and Mar. Here was the 4th. Karna, the Tooth Stealer. Karna, the Devourer. Karna, the beast Mrs. Griffin had hoped Harvey would never meet. Back to the house, child, Mrs. Griffin yelled, as the din of vast wings filled the air. Quickly, quickly! Harvey pulled on Wendell's arm, yelling to him as he did so, but Wendell had a whiff of freedom in his nostrils and wasn't about to give it up. What are you waiting for? Mrs. Griffin yelled. Get away from there, or it'll take off your head. Harvey glanced up at the swooping beast and knew this was no lie. Karna's jaws were wide enough to snap him in half with a single bite, but he couldn't leave Wendell in the mist. They'd begun this adventure together, and that was how they would finish it, dead or alive. He had no choice but to step into the mist himself, and hope that Wendell had snatched a glimpse of the world outside and could pull him through to the street. As he took that step, he heard Mrs. Griffin say something about leading the way. Then he was blinded by the chill of the mist, and the sound of her voice became a garbled whisper. Karna's shrieks were not so hushed, however. They pierced the murk, skewering Harvey's thoughts the way its teeth would skewer his head if the beast caught up with him. Wendell, Harvey yelled, it's coming for us! He caught a glimpse of a figure up ahead of him, then of Wendell's face, smeared by the mist, turning to say, There's no way out. There has to be. I can't find it, Wendell said, his reply almost drowned out by the din of Karna's shrieks. Harvey glanced back the way he'd come, more afraid not to know how close the creature was than to see it, however terrifying the sight. A veil of mist swirled in front of him, but he glimpsed Karna's form as the beast descended. It was the most monstrous of the brood. Its skin rotted and stretched over barbed and polished bone, its throat a nest of snaky tongues, its jaws set with hundreds of teeth. This is the end, Harvey thought. I've only been alive 10 years and 5 months, and I'm going to have my head bitten off. Then, from the corner of his eye, a strange sight. Mrs. Griffin's arms reaching into the mist and dropping Blue Cat to the ground. He's got a good sense of direction, Harvey heard her say. Follow him, follow him. He didn't need a second invitation, nor did Blue Cat. Tail up, it padded off, and Harvey hauled on Wendell's arm to drag him in pursuit. The cat was quick, but so was Harvey. He kept his eyes glued on that bright tail, even when the rush of wings behind him announced that Karna had entered the mist and was almost upon them. 2 strides, 3 strides, 4, and now the mist seemed to be thinning. He heard Wendell whooping for joy. The street, he yelled. I see it. And the next moment Harvey saw it too. The sidewalks wet with rain and shining in the lamplight. Now he dared look back, and there was Karna, its jaws a yard from them. He let go of Wendell's arm and pushed his friend toward the street, ducking as he did so. Karna's lower jaw scraped his spine, but the beast was moving too fast to check itself, and instead of wheeling around to scoop up its quarry, it flew on, out into the real world. Wendell was already there. Harvey joined him a moment later. "We did it!" Wendell yelled. "We did it!" "So did Karna," Harvey said, pointing up at the beast as it rose against the cloudy sky and turned to come back for them. "It wants to drive us back inside," Harvey said. "I'm not going," Wendell cried. "Never! I'm never going in there again." Karna heard his defiance. Its blazing eyes fixed on him, and it came down like a thunderbolt, its shriek echoing through the midnight streets. "Run!" Harvey said. But Karna's stare had rooted Wendell to the spot. Harvey grabbed hold of him and was about to make a run for it when he heard the beast's cry change. Triumph became doubt. Doubt became pain. And suddenly Karna wasn't swooping, but falling. Holes opening in its wings as though a horde of invisible moths was eating at their fabric. It labored to climb the air again, but its wounded wings refused their duty, and seconds later it struck the street so hard it bit off a dozen of its tongues and scattered 100 teeth at the boy's feet. The fall didn't kill it, however. Though agonized by its wounds, it hauled itself up onto the spiky crutches of its wings and began to drag itself back toward the wall. Even now, in this wretched state, it was ferocious, and with snaps to right and left, drove Harvey and Wendell out of its path. "It can't survive out here," Wendell realized aloud. "It's dying." Harvey wished he had some weapon to keep the beast from returning to safety, but he had to be content with the sight of its defeat. If it had not wanted their flesh so badly, he thought, it wouldn't have come after them at such speed, and brought this pain and humiliation upon itself. There was a lesson there, if he could only remember it. Evil, however powerful it seemed, could be undone by its own appetite. Then the creature was gone, a curtain of mist drawn over its retreat. There was only one sign remaining of the mysteries that lay on the other side of the wall. The face of Blue Cat, gazing out at the world that he, like all the occupants of the holiday house, could never explore. His azure gaze met Harvey's for a moment. Then he looked back toward his prison, as though he heard Mrs. Griffin's summons, and with a sorrowful sigh, turned and traipsed away. "Weird," said Wendell, as he stared at the rainy streets. "It's as though I never left." "Is it?" said Harvey. He wasn't so sure. He felt different, marked by this adventure. "I wonder if we'll even remember we came here in a week's time." "Oh, I'll remember," Harvey said. "I've got a few souvenirs." He dug into his pocket in search of the figures from the Ark. Even as he pulled them out, he felt them crumbling, as the real world took its toll on them. "Illusions," he murmured, as they turned to dust and ran away between his fingers. "Who cares?" said Wendell. "It's time to go home, and that's no illusion."
All right, let's talk about some of the lessons that could be learned from Harvey. You might take something different than I take from the book, and there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer with this. It's kind of what you connect with and what you take from different people's experience that's important. So one thing I noticed for Harvey is he is pretty scared at this point, right? Like he is trying to escape the holiday house. There is a lot of evil and a lot of vicious creatures that do not want him to leave, but yet he continues to problem solve. Let's look at some examples. On page 110, it says, this is when they're trying to get, Wendell and Harvey are trying to get through the wall. Harvey says, "We have to be very organized about this," Harvey said to Wendell. "Once we're in the wall, we lose our sense of direction, so we have to be sure we keep walking in a straight line and not let the mist turn us around." "How do we do that?" says Wendell. "I think one of us should go in first and the other keep hold of his hand." So you can see in that example, they're coming up with a strategy. We're not sure if it's going to work. And that tells me that Harvey, one lesson that I could take from him is when you have trouble, try a solution, right? You don't know for sure if it's going to work, but just keep trying. This is illustrated. Never give up and persevere on page 112. It's when Karna starts coming from them. It says, "Wendell!" Harvey yelled. "It's coming for us!" He caught a glimpse of a figure up ahead of him, then of Wendell's face, smeared by the mist, turning to say, "There's no way out." "There has to be." "I can't find it," Wendell said. His reply almost drowned out by the din of Karna's shrieks. In that example, we can see that although Wendell is a bit paralyzed by his fear, Harvey is still persevering, still trying. And so one lesson I can learn is if you're in a terrible situation, just keep trying to solve it. You might not know the right answer, but really think about it and figure out how you can solve the problem. The second thing that I can learn from Harvey is despite the fact that he is in a terrible situation, he has been kind and been a good friend and person to the other people in the house. He's been really kind to Lulu. That's demonstrated on page 106. This is when Harvey went looking for Lulu, and Lulu said, "Just leave me, it's too late for me." And you could see that Harvey was distraught by this. And as Lulu is leaving, she says, "You are my friend," she said as she teetered on the bank. "Thank you for that." So even though they didn't have a ton of time to spend together, Harvey made a positive impression on her, even in a terrible circumstance. That's also illustrated with Wendell, who, as we know, Wendell has not always been a loyal friend. But like every friendship, there are ups and downs. And even though Wendell perhaps wanted the vampire to eat Harvey instead of him, Harvey is still looking out for Wendell. On page 112, this is when Karna is coming after them. "Wendell!" Harvey yelled. "It's coming for us!" He caught a glimpse of a figure up ahead of him, then of Wendell's face smeared by the mist, turning to say, I already read this one. "There's no way out. There has to be." "I can't find it," Wendell said. So the reason why I included that again is because he is not leaving him behind, right? He is working with him and still trying to help Wendell. On page 113, we see that Miss Griffin, who is also cheering for him, he's been nothing but kind to Miss Griffin, and that kindness comes back to him on page 113. It says, "He's got a good sense of direction," Harvey heard her say. "Follow him, follow him." So Miss Griffin brought the cat to help them get out. So even though that would probably put her in danger, she still did it anyways. So a couple lessons that I could take from this is, even when times are really tough, how we treat people is really important. And another thing is, even when times are really tough, keep trying to solve your problems. So I can learn that from Harvey. I wonder what you have learned from Harvey. As you are reading your book, I want you to think about what lessons are you learning. It doesn't necessarily need to come from the main character, but I want you to pay particular attention to the lessons that you are learning. Okay? Have a good day.